I'm Callum Ridgway, 33 years old, and I used to think my life was pretty good. 3 months ago, I'd have told you my marriage to Marissa was solid, maybe even something to be proud of. We'd been together for 7 years, and I thought we'd figured out how to make it work despite our differences. She came from a world of old money, fancy houses, private schools, and family names that meant something. I came from a blue-collar life. My dad was a mechanic, my mom a nurse, and we never had much beyond what we needed. When we met, I was just a guy fixing computers, and she was this bright, beautiful woman who didn't seem to care about where I came from. I thought we were equals, or at least I convinced myself we were. But looking back, I see the cracks were always there, waiting to split wide open. Her family, her mother Blythe and her older brother Gregory, never liked me. Every time I was around them, it felt like I was auditioning for a part I'd never get. They'd smile, sure, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach their eyes. Marissa always brushed it off, saying, "They'll come around, Callum, just give them time." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But 7 years is a long time to wait for people to stop treating you like dirt under their polished shoes. Things had been tense for a while, little arguments here and there, but nothing I couldn't handle. That is, until the annual family reunion up in New York. It was supposed to be a weekend of bonding, a chance to smooth things over. Marissa begged me to go, said it'd be different this time, that her family would see me for who I was. I wasn't thrilled about it, honestly. I'd rather have stayed home and fixed a dozen broken laptops than face her relatives again, but I went for her. The estate was this huge colonial house perched on a cliff, all steep staircases and cold, echoing rooms. It was beautiful in a way that made you feel small, like you didn't belong unless you were born into it. From the moment we arrived, I could feel the weight of their stairs. Blythe greeted me with a handshake so limp I barely felt it, and Gregory smirked like he knew something I didn't. The whole weekend stretched out in front of me like a test I hadn't prepared for, and I wasn't wrong. Every conversation was a minefield. I'd say something simple, like how nice the weather was, and Blythe would correct me, saying it was unseasonably warm for this time of year, as if I'd insulted the family by not knowing. Gregory would chime in with some backhanded comment about my job, asking if I'd ever thought about moving up in the world. I'd laugh it off, try to keep the peace, but inside, I was boiling. Marissa kept telling me to relax, that they didn't mean anything by it, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew they did. By the second day, I was counting the hours until we could leave. I kept my head down, stayed polite, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. It just kept slipping away. Dinner that night was the breaking point. We were all gathered around this long, polished table, candles flickering, silverware clinking, and I thought maybe I could make it through without a fight. Marissa squeezed my hand under the table, like she was rooting for me, and for a second, I felt okay. But then Gregory started in again, louder this time, and Blythe joined him, picking apart everything from the way I sat to the shirt I'd picked out. I could feel the room closing in, all those eyes on me, waiting for me to mess up. I don't know why I thought it'd be different. Maybe I was just tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Maybe I wanted to prove something to them, to Marissa, to myself. Whatever it was, it set the stage for everything that came after, and by the end of that weekend, I wasn't the same man who'd walked through those doors. That reunion wasn't just a family gathering. It was the start of a storm I didn't see coming, one that had been brewing quietly for years. I'm Callum Ridgway, and I've never been good at hiding how I feel, especially not that night at the reunion. The family estate up in New York was like something out of a movie, big, old, and cold, with its cliffside view and endless staircases winding up to rooms I wasn't allowed to see. Marissa had dragged me there, promising it'd be different this time, that her family would finally ease up on me. I didn't believe her, not really, but I went anyway because I loved her and because I kept hoping she'd be right one day. The whole place smelled like money and judgment, and from the minute we pulled up, I knew I was in for it. Gregory, her older brother, was waiting by the front door with that smirk of his, like he'd already won some game I didn't know we were playing. Blythe, her mother, swept out in a cloud of perfume and gave me a look that said I'd tracked mud on her perfect floors, even though my shoes were clean. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just a couple days, but every step I took in that house felt like I was walking deeper into a trap. Marissa kept whispering to me, "Just smile, Callum, they'll warm up," but her voice sounded more desperate than sure. Dinner was the real test, though. We all sat down at this massive table, the kind you see in pictures of royalty, with candles and crystal glasses and more forks than I knew what to do with. I dressed up, put on a tie, even though I hate them, because I wanted to fit in, or at least not give them an easy target. The food came out, fancy stuff I couldn't pronounce, and I kept my mouth shut, nodding along while they talked about people and places I'd never heard of. Then Gregory started in. "So, Callum," he said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the world, "still tinkering with those computers? Must be nice to have such a simple life." His tone was all sharp edges, and a few of her cousins snickered. I forced a laugh, said something about how I liked my work, but he didn't let up. "Ever think about doing something more ambitious?" he asked, and I could feel Blythe's eyes on me, waiting for me to trip over my answer. I mumbled something about being happy where I was, and Marissa squeezed my knee under the table, like that was supposed to help. It didn't. The room kept buzzing with their chatter, and I felt like a ghost, just there, not really part of it. Then I got this dumb idea to give a toast. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it'd show them I wasn't some outsider, that I belonged at that table with my wife. I stood up, cleared my throat, and started talking about gratitude, about how lucky I felt to be part of their family. I kept it short, simple, nothing fancy, but halfway through, her cousins started laughing. Not loud, just this quiet, mean chuckle that spread like a ripple. My face burned, and I stopped, looking around at all those faces, some amused, some bored, none of them on my side. I raised my voice, not yelling, just firm, and said, "I'm serious. I mean this." The laughter died, and the room went dead quiet. I thought maybe I'd gotten through, that they'd heard me for once. But then Blythe stood up, slow and deliberate, like she was about to deliver a verdict. "We don't tolerate tantrums at this table, Callum," she said, her voice ice cold. Tantrums. Like I was a kid throwing a fit instead of a man trying to say something real. I looked at Marissa, waiting for her to say something, anything, to back me up. She didn't. She just stared at her wine glass, swirling it like it held all the answers. My chest tightened, and I sat back down, the silence pressing in on me. The rest of dinner dragged on, forks scraping plates, voices picking up again like nothing happened, but I was done. I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't just another bad night. It was the start of something breaking. Gregory smirked across the table, Blythe sipped her drink, and Marissa wouldn't meet my eyes. I tried to reach out, to build a bridge with that stupid toast, and they'd burned it down before I could finish. I kept my mouth shut after that, nodding when I had to, but inside, I was raging. Not loud, not wild, just this steady, growing heat I couldn't shake. I'd spent years taking their jabs, swallowing my pride, telling myself it was worth it for her. But sitting there, watching her choose her wine over me, I started to wonder how much more I could take. The night ended with polite goodbyes and fake smiles, and I followed Marissa up to our room, the weight of that moment still hanging over me. I didn't know it yet, but that toast gone cold was the first crack in a wall I'd been holding up for too long. I'm Callum Ridgway, and I've never been one for big blowouts. But that night after dinner at the reunion, I couldn't keep it in anymore. We'd made it back to the guest room Marissa and I were sharing, some fancy setup with a 4-poster bed and curtains that probably cost more than my car. The door clicked shut behind us, and I just stood there for a second, staring at the floor, trying to figure out how to say what I'd been holding back for years. My tie was choking me, so I yanked it off and tossed it on the chair, the whole night replaying in my head Gregory's smirks, Blythe's cold dismissal, and Marissa sitting there like a statue while her family laughed at me. I turned to her, and she was already perched on the edge of the bed, arms crossed, looking at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "What was that, Callum?" she asked, her voice low but sharp, like she was scolding a kid. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool, and said, "I've had enough, Marissa. I'm done with this." She rolled her eyes, and that little move lit a fire in me. "You're too sensitive," she said, like it was some fact I should have known by now. "They were just joking. You didn't have to make a scene." A scene? I hadn't yelled, hadn't thrown anything, just raised my voice to finish a toast they'd turned into a punchline. I stepped closer, hands clenched at my sides, and said, "I'm your husband, not their punching bag. I've been taking their crap for years, and you never once stand up for me." She didn't flinch, just kept those arms crossed tight, her face all calm and collected like she'd rehearsed this. "You don't get it," she said. "This is how they are. You just have to deal with it. Deal with it." 7 years of snide comments, fake smiles, and tests I couldn't pass, and she thought I should just keep swallowing it. My voice stayed low, but it was shaking now. "I shouldn't have to deal with it. You should have had my back down there. Instead, you let them treat me like I'm nothing." She sighed, long and dramatic, like I was exhausting her. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, and I could hear her mother in her tone, that same superior edge. That's when I lost it, not loud, not wild, just this quiet snap inside me. "No, Marissa," I said, "I'm not. I'm done pretending this is okay. I'm done being the guy they kick around while you watch." Her eyes narrowed, and she stood up, finally dropping those crossed arms. "You have two options, Callum," she said, her voice hard now. "Apologize or leave." I froze. The room went so still I could hear the wind rattling the old windows. Apologize? For what? For trying to say something real? For wanting my wife to care? I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to soften, to show me she didn't mean it. But she just stood there, chin up, like she'd drawn a line and dared me to cross it. I'd spent years fighting for us, arguing my case to her family, proving I was good enough, begging her to see me as more than the guy they didn't want her to marry. And now she was giving me an ultimatum, like I was the one who'd failed. My chest hurt, this deep, heavy ache, but my head was clear for the first time in a long time. I didn't yell back. I didn't beg her to change her mind. I just looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who'd chosen them over me again. "Okay," I said, my voice steady even though I felt like I was breaking. She blinked, like she hadn't expected that, but I didn't give her time to respond. I turned, grabbed my duffel bag from the closet, and started packing. Not everything, just what I needed. A few shirts, my jeans, my toothbrush. She watched me, silent now, and I could feel her eyes on my back, but she didn't say a word. "No, wait. No, let's talk." Nothing. I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked to the door. My hand was on the knob when she finally spoke. "You're really doing this?" she asked, and there was a crack in her voice, but it wasn't enough to stop me. I didn't turn around. "Yeah," I said. "I am." And then I walked out. The hallway was dark, the house quiet except for the faint hum of voices downstairs. I moved fast, down those stupid winding stairs, past the portraits of her ancestors staring at me like they knew I didn't belong. My truck was parked out front, and I threw my bag in the back, climbed in, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the night, and I drove off, the estate shrinking in my rearview mirror. I didn't know where I was going yet, just that I wasn't staying. My hands gripped the wheel tight, and my heart was pounding, but I didn't feel trapped anymore. I'd spent so long trying to fit into her world, bending myself to make it work, and in that moment, I realized I didn't have to. She'd given me a choice, apologize or leave, and I'd picked the one she didn't think I would. The road stretched out ahead, empty and black, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I'm Callum Ridgway, and I didn't look back after I left that big, cold house on the cliff. The truck's engine rumbled under me as I drove away from the reunion, away from Marissa and her family, away from 7 years of trying to be someone I wasn't. My hands were still tied on the wheel, my bag bouncing in the back seat, and my mind was spinning, but I didn't feel lost, not yet. I just knew I couldn't go home, not to the condo we shared, not to the life that felt like a cage with her name on it. I drove through the night, the road dark and quiet, passing little towns with their lights winking out one by one. My phone stayed off. I didn't want to hear her voice, or Gregory's, or Blythe's, didn't want to see the messages I knew would come. About 2 hours in, I saw a sign for a small airport, one of those regional ones you'd miss if you weren't looking. It wasn't much, barely more than a strip of runway and a low brick building, but something about it pulled me in. I parked the truck, grabbed my bag, and walked inside. The place was half asleep, just a bored guy at the counter and a couple of vending machines humming in the corner. I didn't have a plan, didn't even know where I wanted to go, but when I got to the desk, I asked, "What's the next flight out?" The guy barely looked up, tapping at his computer. "Got one to Oregon in 40 minutes, he said. One way's $200. Oregon. I'd never been there, never even thought about it much, but it sounded far, far from New York, far from her family, far from the mess I'd just walked out of. "I'll take it," I said, pulling out my card. He shrugged, printed the ticket, and handed it over like it was no big deal. To him, it wasn't. To me, it was everything. I sat on a hard plastic chair near the gate, my bag at my feet, watching the clock tick down. My heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear, it was something else, something like relief mixed with a kind of wild energy I hadn't felt in years. The plane was small, one of those puddle jumpers with tight seats and a single aisle, but I didn't care. I squeezed in next to a window, buckled up, and stared out at the dark runway. When the engines roared and we started rolling, I felt the ground slip away, and with it, all the weight I'd been carrying. Up there, 20,000 feet in the air, it was just me and the hum of the plane, no voices telling me what I should do, no eyes judging me for what I wasn't. I kept my phone off the whole flight, didn't even check it when we landed. I didn't want to know if Marissa had called, didn't want to hear her ask why I'd left or tell me to come back. The airport in Oregon was bigger but still quiet, the kind of place where people move slow and don't ask questions. I rented a car with cash, a beat-up sedan that smelled like old coffee, and drove toward the coast. I didn't have a map, just a vague idea of heading west until I hit water. The sky was starting to lighten by the time I got there, gray and soft with the promise of morning. I found a cheap motel near the beach, the kind with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered. The lady at the desk didn't care who I was or why I was there, just took my money and gave me a key. The room was small bed, chair, a sink with a cracked mirror, but it was mine, at least for now. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the faint sound of waves outside. My hands were shaking a little, not from cold, but from the rush of it all. I'd done it. I'd walked out, bought a ticket, and landed halfway across the country with no plan and no apologies. Part of me wondered what Marissa was doing right then. Had she told her family yet? Were they laughing about it, saying they knew I'd crack eventually? I could picture Blythe shaking her head, Gregory smirking, and Marissa sitting there, maybe confused, maybe mad, but probably not chasing after me. She'd given me that ultimatum, apologize or leave, and I'd picked the door she didn't think I'd take. I lay back on the bed, staring at the stained ceiling, and let the quiet sink in. No one knew where I was. No one could reach me. For the first time in years, I wasn't answering to anybody out. Not her family, not even myself in that old, pleading way I used to. The air smelled like salt and freedom, and even though I didn't know what came next, I knew I wasn't going back. Oregon was a blank slate, a place where I could breathe without someone telling me I was doing it wrong. I closed my eyes, the sound of the ocean seeping through the thin walls, and thought, this is it. This is mine. The one-way ticket wasn't just a flight, it was a line I'd drawn, and I wasn't crossing back over it. I'm Callum Ridgway, and those first couple of days in Oregon felt like I'd stepped out of my own life and into someone else's, a better one, a quieter one. I woke up in that cheap motel room with the cracked mirror and the sound of waves sneaking through the window, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to anybody. My phone was still off, shoved deep in my bag, and I wasn't ready to turn it back on. I didn't want to know what was waiting for me, missed calls, texts, whatever Marissa or her family had to say. I just wanted the silence, and Oregon gave it to me. After a quick shower in that tiny bathroom, I grabbed my stuff and checked out, figuring I'd find something more permanent. The lady at the desk didn't even look up when I dropped the key, and I liked that. No questions, no fuss. I drove along the coast in that rented sedan, the ocean on my left, gray and endless, and the trees on my right, tall and green in a way I wasn't used to back east. It was beautiful, but not in a loud way, just steady, like it didn't need to prove anything. I ended up in a small town, one of those places with a single main street and a handful of shops that looked like they'd been there forever. There was a sign in a window, studio for rent, $600 per month. I pulled over, called the number, and met a guy named Tom who smelled like fish and handed me the keys after I gave him cash for the first month. The place was nothing fancy, one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a view of the water if you leaned out the window just right, but it was mine. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the lumpy couch, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That first day, I walked down to the beach, hands in my pockets, the wind tugging at my jacket. The sand was cold under my shoes, and the waves rolled in slow and steady, like they were telling me to take my time. I felt lighter than I had in years, like all that weight from Marissa's family, their jabs, their rules, their expectations had stayed back in New York. I picked up a couple freelance IT jobs online, easy stuff I could do from anywhere, and bought some groceries from a little store where the cashier smiled at me like I was a regular already. It was simple, and simple was what quickly I needed. By day 3, the peace started to crack. I'd left my phone off, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me, and I powered it up. The screen lit up with notifications, one after another, like a storm rolling in. Marissa had called 10 times, left voicemails I didn't listen to. Gregory sent a text, "You're a real piece of work," running off like that. Blythe's message was longer, something about how I disgraced the family and abandoned my responsibilities. I scrolled through it all, my stomach twisting, but I didn't let it sink in too deep. I'd heard it before, their anger, their blame, and I wasn't going to carry it anymore. There were messages from my sister too, worried ones, and a couple from my buddy Dorian, just checking in. I'd get back to them later, but not yet. I deleted the family group chats Marissa had forced me into, those endless threads of her cousins planning brunches and her mother sending passive-aggressive reminders about etiquette. My phone felt cleaner after that, like I'd scrubbed off a layer of grime. The calls kept coming, though, Marissa again, then Gregory, then a number I didn't recognize but figured was Blythe using someone else's phone. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear the panic or the rage, didn't need to know if they were cursing me or crying. I already knew the script. I was the bad guy, the quitter, the one who couldn't handle it. Fine. Let them think that. I sat down at the little table in my studio, opened my laptop, and typed an email to Marissa. It wasn't long, just a few lines. I'm safe. I'm not coming back. If you need to contact me, speak to my lawyer. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but I'd get one soon enough. I hit send, shut the laptop, and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. No apology, no excuses, no room for her to argue. That was it, the last thing I'd say to her for a while, maybe ever. The phone buzzed again, but I turned it off and tossed it on the couch. Outside, the sky was turning pink over the water, and I stepped onto the tiny balcony, breathing in the salty air. I could hear seagulls and the low hum of a boat somewhere far off. This was my life now, quiet, mine, no one else's rules. I didn't know how long it'd last, didn't know what they'd do next, but for those first 48 hours, I'd found something I hadn't had in years: peace. Silence wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of their voices, their demands, their judgment. It said everything I couldn't put into words. I'd walked away, and I wasn't looking back. The waves kept rolling in, steady and sure, and I let them wash over me, drowning out the past one crash at a time. I'm Callum Ridgway, and after a week in Oregon, I started to feel like the dust was finally settling, not just around me, but inside me too. That little studio by the coast was home now, with its creaky floors and the salty breeze that slipped through the window every morning. I'd wake up to the sound of waves, make coffee in the chipped mug I'd bought from a thrift store, and sit at my table with my laptop, picking up freelance IT jobs to keep the bills paid. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and that was enough. Back in New York, I could only imagine what they were saying about me. Marissa's family had a way of turning everything into a story where they were the victims, and I was the villain who'd stormed out and left them all in ruins. He abandoned us. I could hear Blythe saying, her voice dripping with that fake hurt she was so good at. He was unstable, Gregory would add, smirking like he'd always known I'd crack. He couldn't handle the pressure, Marissa might say, quiet and sad, like she was disappointed but not surprised. I didn't have to guess too hard. I'd lived with their judgment long enough to know how they'd spin it. They'd sit around that big table at the estate, sipping wine and picking me apart, convincing themselves I'd been the problem all along. But I wasn't there to hear it, and that was the best part. I had people who saw it differently, though, my own witnesses, you could say. My sister, Ellie, had watched me shrink over the years, trying to fit into Marissa's world. She'd call me after every visit to their house, asking, "Why do you let them treat you like that?" I'd shrug it off, tell her it wasn't a big deal, but she knew better. My best friend Dorian was the same. He'd been there from the start, back when Marissa and I were just dating, and he'd seen me slowly disappear into the shadow of her family. "You're not yourself around them, man," he'd say, and I'd laugh it off, but he was right. They'd both tried to warn me, in their own ways, that I was losing something, myself, maybe, and now that I was gone, I could feel it coming back. Marissa didn't file for divorce, not right away, and that didn't surprise me. She wasn't the type to act fast. She'd wait, play it out, see if I'd break first. Blythe probably told her I'd come crawling back, tail between my legs, begging for forgiveness. They always do. I could hear her saying, all smug and certain, like I was some predictable stray dog. Gregory would back her up, saying I didn't have the guts to stay gone. They'd sit there, plotting how long it'd take me to crack, how many days before I showed up at the condo with an apology and a promise to behave. But days turned into weeks, and I didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up. I'd sent that one email, "I'm safe. I'm not coming back. Talk to my lawyer," and that was it. Radio silence from my end, and it drove them crazy, I bet. I could picture Marissa checking her phone, waiting for something that wasn't coming, her mother hovering over her shoulder, telling her to be patient. But I wasn't playing their game anymore. Out here, I was breathing again, really breathing, not just sucking in air between their jabs and expectations. The air in Oregon was clean, sharp with salt and pine, and it filled my lungs like it was washing out all the years I'd spent holding my breath. I'd walk the beach in the mornings, hands in my pockets, watching the waves roll in and out, and it was like they were smoothing over the rough edges inside me. I didn't need much, just my little place, my work, and the quiet. I deleted their voices from my phone, their faces from my head, and every day I stayed gone, I felt stronger, like I was building something new out of the pieces they'd tried to break. I thought about my mom sometimes, how she'd raised me and Ellie on her own after Dad died, working long shifts at the hospital to keep us fed. She never apologized for who she was, never bent to fit anyone else's idea of her, and I'd forgotten that about myself somewhere along the way. Marissa's family had made me feel small, like I had to prove I was worth something, but out here, I didn't have to prove a damn thing. The people I met, the guy at the grocery store, the lady who ran the coffee shop down the street, didn't care where I came from or who I'd married. They just nodded, said hi, and let me be. It was simple, and simple was freedom. I kept my phone off most of the time now, only turning it on to check in with Ellie or Dorian, who'd both cheered when I told them I'd left. About time, Ellie said, and Dorian just laughed, saying, I knew you had it in you. They were my anchors, the ones who reminded me I wasn't crazy for walking away. Marissa could wait all she wanted. Her family could spin their stories, but I wasn't going back. The dust had settled, and I was still standing stronger, quieter, and finally free. I'm Callum Ridgway, and 2 months after I landed in Oregon, I had to go back, not to stay, not to fix things, just to get what was mine. I'd been living light in that little coastal studio, working my freelance gigs, breathing the salty air, but there were things in the condo I couldn't leave behind forever. Not furniture or fancy stuff, Marissa could keep all that, but the small things that mattered. My mom's old books, a watch my dad gave me before he passed, a couple photos of me and Ellie when we were kids. Those were mine, legally and in every other way, and I wasn't letting them stay buried in her world. So I booked a cheap flight back to New York, rented a car at the airport, and drove to the condo on a gray Tuesday morning. The whole trip felt like walking into a memory I didn't want to relive, the familiar roads, the hum of the city, the weight of it all creeping back. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, not Marissa, not her family, not even Ellie or Dorian. I wanted it quick and quiet, in and out before they could turn it into a fight. The condo looked the same when I pulled up, sleek building, glass windows, the kind of place her money had picked out, not mine. I still had my key, and it turned in the lock easy enough, the doors swinging open to that sterile, expensive smell I'd never liked. The place was empty, or so I thought. Marissa's shoes weren't by the door. Her coat wasn't on the rack. I let out a breath and got to work, pulling a couple boxes from the closet and starting in the bedroom. I grabbed the books from my nightstand, the watch from the drawer, and a handful of clothes I didn't mind taking. It felt strange, being there without her voice in the background, without her eyes watching me like I was about to mess something up. I was halfway through packing when the door opened behind me. I froze, hands on a photo frame, and turned to see Marissa standing there. No warning, no call, just her in that little coat her mother gave her, the one that cost more than my truck. She looked the same, dark hair pulled back, face calm, but her eyes were wider than usual, like she hadn't expected me. Callum, she said, and her voice was soft, almost shaky. I nodded, keeping my hands busy with the box. Just getting my stuff, I said, not looking at her too long. She stepped inside, closing the door, and stood there like she didn't know what to do. You really meant it, she said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded again. Yeah. She moved closer, her boots clicking on the hardwood, and I could feel her trying to figure me out, like she always did. We can fix this, she said, and her voice had that practiced tone, the one she used when she thought she could talk me into anything. I shook my head, slow and sure, and kept packing. No, we can't. She went quiet then, and I thought maybe she'd leave, but she didn't. She just stood there, watching me fold a shirt, her arms crossed tight like she was holding herself together. You didn't even try, she said after a minute, and there was a bite to it now, a little of that anger I'd been waiting for. I stopped, looked at her straight on, and said, I tried for 7 years, Marissa. You didn't. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she wasn't sure how to argue that. I went back to the box, stacking the photos, feeling the air get heavier between us. You never fought for me, I said, keeping my voice steady even though it hurt to say it out loud. You fought to keep me in place, to keep me quiet, to keep them happy. But you never fought for me. She flinched, just a little, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, maybe guilt, maybe realization, but it was gone fast. That's not fair, she said, but it sounded weak, like she didn't believe it herself. I shrugged, taping up the box. Maybe not. But it's true. I picked up the second box, started on the living room, some old records, a mug I liked, and she followed me, hovering like she wanted to stop me but didn't know how. What am I supposed to tell them? She asked, and I knew she meant her family. I didn't look up. Whatever you want. I don't care anymore. That hit her. I could tell, because she went quiet again, longer this time. I kept moving, kept packing, and when I was done, I had 2 boxes and my bag, ready to go. She was still standing there, coat on, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Callum, she said, one last try, but I shook my head again. I'm done, Marissa. Take care. I walked past her, out the door, down the hall to the elevator. She didn't follow, didn't call after me, and when the doors closed, I felt that weight lift again. I drove straight to the airport, shipped the boxes to Oregon, and caught the next flight out. Back on the coast, I landed under a sky full of stars, the ocean waiting for me like it always did. That last visit didn't change anything. It just closed the door I'd already walked through. She still didn't get it, still thought it was about fixing something broken. But it wasn't. It was about letting go. I'm Callum Ridgway, and after I got back to Oregon from that last trip to New York, I started building something real, not just a life, but a version of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. The boxes from the condo arrived a few days later, and I unpacked them slow, setting my mom's books on a shelf I'd picked up from a garage sale, hanging the photo of me and Ellie on the wall by the couch. The watch from my dad stayed in its box for now. I wasn't ready to wear it yet, but knowing it was there felt right. That little studio by the coast was starting to look like mine, not just a place to crash, and every piece I added made it feel more solid. I've been freelancing since I got here, fixing people's tech problems online, but I decided to push it further, started advertising my services around town, handing out flyers at the coffee shop and the hardware store. Word spread quick, and soon I had steady clients, small businesses mostly, who liked that I didn't overcomplicate things or overcharge them. They didn't care that I wasn't from some big-name family or that I'd married into money they'd never see. They just cared that I showed up and got the job done. It was a kind of respect I hadn't felt in years, and it built me up, brick by brick, into someone I could stand to look at in the mirror. The town was small, but the people were good, honest in a way Marissa's crowd never was. I met a guy named Pete at the diner one morning, a fisherman with hands like sandpaper who'd nod at me over his coffee like we'd known each other forever. There was Sarah, who ran the coffee shop and always slipped me an extra muffin when I came in, saying, "You look like you could use it." They didn't ask about my past, didn't need to know my tax bracket or who I'd been married to, and that was a relief I didn't know I'd been craving. I started hanging out with them more, grabbing a beer with Pete after his boat came in, helping Sarah fix her ancient computer when it crashed. They became my people, not because I forced it, but because it just happened, natural and easy. I got back in touch with Ellie too, calling her one night after I'd settled in. She picked up on the first ring, her voice bright and loud. "Callum, you're alive." I laughed, told her about the studio, the ocean, the work I was doing. She said she was proud of me, and I could hear the truth in it. She'd been waiting for me to break free longer than I had. We talked about mom and dad, about how she was doing back home, and I promised I'd visit soon. It felt good, having her voice in my ear again, like a piece of my old self slotting back into place. I started hiking on weekends, following trails through the woods or along the cliffs, the kind of thing I'd never had time for back east. The air was sharp, the views wide, and it cleared my head in a way nothing else did. One Saturday, I stopped by the local shelter on a whim and came home with a dog, a scruffy mutt with one ear that stuck up funny. I named him Booker after nothing in particular, just a name that fit. He'd follow me everywhere, trotting along on walks or curling up by my feet while I worked. He didn't ask for much, just food, a pat on the head, a quick run on the beach, and giving him that made me feel steady, like I was good for something again. It's funny how the simplest things started to mean the most. I'd sit on my balcony at night, Booker snoring beside me, listening to the waves and watching the stars prick through the dark. The work was picking up. I was consulting full-time now, building systems for local shops, troubleshooting networks, and people trusted me, relied on me, without needing to know my whole story. I traded the condo's polished floors for this creaky little place, the city noise for the ocean's hum, and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd spent so long in Marissa's shadow, bending to fit her family's rules, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Out here, I didn't have to explain myself, didn't have to apologize for where I came from or what I didn't have. Pete would slap me on the back and say, "Good to have you around, Cal," and Sarah would grin when I fixed her printer, and that was enough. Booker would nudge my hand with his wet nose, and I'd laugh, scratching his ears, thinking how easy it was to make him happy. I'd found peace. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet sort that sinks in slow and stays. It was in the salt air, the steady rhythm of my days, the way I could hear myself think again. I was rebuilding, one small piece at a time, and every brick I laid felt like a step away from the man I'd been, the one who'd begged for a seat at a table that never wanted him. I'm Callum Ridgway, and after months of quiet in Oregon, the past started creeping back, not loud or crashing in, but soft, like echoes I couldn't quite shake. I'd built a good rhythm out here, work, walks with Booker, coffee with Sarah, beers with Pete, and it felt solid, like the life I'd always wanted but didn't know I could have. The studio was home now, with its thrift store shelves and the sound of the ocean keeping me company at night. I'd stopped checking my phone for messages from Marissa or her family, stopped bracing for their next move. I thought I'd left them behind for good, but then one morning, I opened my laptop and saw an email from her. It wasn't much, just a few lines, no subject, but it stopped me cold. I sat there at my little table, coffee going cold in my hands, staring at her name on the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it unread, keep the peace I'd fought so hard for, but another part, the stubborn part, maybe clicked it open. She didn't beg me to come back, didn't try to guilt me like her mother would have. It was simpler than that, sadder too. "I see it now, Callum," she wrote. How it unraveled. "I was so busy trying to keep them happy, Mom, Gregory, all of them, that I didn't see I was losing you. I'm sorry." That was it. No promises, no pleas, just regret laid out plain and quiet. I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, letting it sink in. Booker nosed at my leg, whining for his walk, but I just sat there, staring at the words. It wasn't anger that hit me. I'd burned through that months ago. It was something else, a kind of tired ache. She saw it now, she said, but where was that clarity when I was standing in front of her, asking her to choose me? Where was it when I was packing my bag, waiting for her to say something, anything, to stop me? I didn't reply. Not because I was mad, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because there was nothing left to say. Silence felt truer than any words I could send back. It was the answer she'd never heard when I was still there, still trying. I closed the laptop, grabbed Booker's leash, and took him out to the beach, letting the wind and the waves drown out the echo of her email. The sand was cold under my boots, and Booker ran ahead, chasing gulls, while I walked slow, hands in my pockets, thinking it over. She'd lost me long before I left, and I'd lost her too, somewhere between her family's rules and my own breaking point. That email didn't change anything. It just confirmed what I already knew. I was done carrying her regret along with mine. A few months later, another letter came, this time in the mail, handwritten on thick paper that smelled faintly of Blythe's perfume. I knew it was from her before I even opened it. Marissa didn't write letters, but her mother loved the drama of it. I stood by the mailbox, the ocean rumbling in the distance, and tore it open. "Callum," it started, all formal and sharp. "You broke my daughter's heart. You walked away from your responsibilities, from our family, and left her to pick up the pieces. I hope you're proud of yourself." The rest was more of the same. Condescension dripping from every line, blaming me like I'd torched their perfect little world. I read it once, standing there in the wind, then walked inside and fed it to the shredder by my desk. The machine whirred, chewing it up, and I watched the pieces fall into the trash, feeling nothing but relief. Blythe didn't get it, never would. She thought I'd broken Marissa, but Marissa had broken herself, choosing them over me every chance she got. I wasn't proud of leaving, but I wasn't ashamed either. It was what I had to do to breathe again. I didn't know her an answer, didn't know her anything anymore. The shredder clicked off, and I took Booker for another walk, letting the salt air clear my head. Those echoes, Marissa's email, Blythe's letter, kept coming, but they didn't stick. I'd built too much here to let them pull me back. Work was steady now, my clients relying on me, and I liked the weight of that, the way it kept me grounded. Pete and I had started fishing on weekends, just a little boat, and some quiet hours on the water, and Sarah would tease me about my sunburn when I came into the shop after. Ellie called sometimes, telling me about her life back east, and I'd tell her about Booker's latest trick or the view from my balcony. It was small, this world I'd made, but it was solid, and it didn't bend to anyone else's rules. The past could echo all it wanted. Marissa could regret, Blythe could rage, but I wasn't listening anymore. I'd found my footing, one step at a time, and every day I stayed gone, those voices got quieter. I'd sit out on the bluff some nights, watching the waves crash under the stars, and feel the truth settle in. I didn't need their forgiveness, didn't need their understanding. I had this. The ocean, the dog, the people who didn't care where I'd come from, and it was enough. I'm Callum Ridgway, and it's been a year since I walked out of that big house in New York, a year since I bought that one-way ticket to Oregon and decided to stop explaining myself. The divorce is final now, papers signed, lawyers paid, all the loose ends tied up neat and clean. I live in a modest place on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, a step up from the studio but still simple, with a porch where I can sit and watch the water stretch out forever. I wake up early most days, make coffee, and take Booker for a walk along the shore before I settle into work, still in tech, still fixing systems and solving problems, but on my terms now. The air's always got that salty bite to it, and the sound of the waves is a constant, like a heartbeat I've gotten used to. It's not a flashy life, but it's mine, and that's the biggest change of all. I don't answer to anyone anymore. Back when I left, Marissa wanted an apology, wanted me to bend one last time to fit her world, but I chose the ticket instead, and I've never looked back. The condo, her family, that whole suffocating mess, it's a memory now, fading a little more every day I spend out here. I think about it sometimes, how I spent 7 years trying to be what they wanted, twisting myself into knots to prove I was good enough. Her mother, Blythe, with her cold stares and sharper words, Gregory with his smirks and jabs, and Marissa, caught between them and me, always picking their side when it mattered. I used to wonder if I could have fought harder, stayed longer, but out here, with the ocean in front of me and Booker at my feet, I know I did the right thing. Leaving wasn't running, it was saving myself. The divorce took months to sort out, longer than it should have, because Marissa dragged her feet. She didn't fight it outright, didn't show up with lawyers screaming, but she stalled, missed deadlines, asked for extensions, like she thought I'd change my mind if she waited me out. I didn't. My lawyer handled most of it, and I kept my distance, sending emails when I had to, keeping it short and to the point. When the final papers came through, I signed them at my kitchen table, the pen scratching loud in the quiet, and felt a weight lift I didn't know was still there. It was done. No more ties, no more claims, just me and the life I'd built. Out here, I've got my routines, work in the mornings, hikes or fishing with Pete on weekends, coffee with Sarah when she's not swamped at the shop. Ellie came to visit once, stayed a week, and we sat on the porch every night, talking about everything and nothing. She said I looked different, lighter, and I told her I felt it too. Booker's grown into himself, still scruffy but smarter now, and he's my shadow, follows me from room to room, sleeps by the door like he's guarding it. The people in town know me, not my whole story, just the parts one share, and they don't ask for more. Pete calls me Cal, like it's always been my name, and Sarah started trusting me with the shop's books when her numbers don't add up. It's a community, not forced or fake, just people living their lives alongside mine. I don't explain myself anymore, not to them, not to anyone. That's the real freedom, the thing I didn't know I'd lost until I got it back. Back in New York, I was always justifying why I did what I did, why I wasn't like them, why I deserved a seat at their table. Here, no one cares. I show up, I do my work, I crack a beer with Pete or toss a stick for Booker, and that's enough. I don't owe anyone my story, don't have to prove I'm worth something. Marissa's family thought love came with conditions: obey, fit in, apologize when you step out of line. But I've learned it doesn't have to. Ellie loves me because I'm her brother, Pete because I'm a friend, Booker because I'm his person. It's simple, and simple's what I needed all along. I think about Marissa sometimes, wonder what she's doing now that the papers are signed. Maybe she's still in the condo, still going to those family dinners, still trying to keep Blythe happy. Her email from months back, the one about regret, sits unanswered in my inbox, and I've never felt the need to change that. She made her choice back then, picking them over me, and I made mine when I walked out. We're even now, in a way, both free to live how we want, just not together. I don't hate her, don't even resent her anymore. It's just done. The Bluff's my home now, with its wide views and quiet nights, and every day I spend here, I feel more like the man I was supposed to be. I work hard, keep things easy, and let the ocean smooth out the rest. No apologies, no looking back, just me, my dog, my people, and a life I built my way. You ever feel your heartbeat in your teeth? It's a hollow, thudding ache that shifts your focus inward until every nerve in your jaw aches with anticipation. That's exactly what happened the moment Karina Ellison slid the HR document across the conference table, her fingers barely grazing the paper's edge before she snapped it into place, like a gavel striking down a verdict. I watched the heads of operations swivel in unison, their eyes widening as they recognized the stark, typewritten ultimatum puppy beneath the fluorescent glare. Accept the 60% pay cut, or I'll find someone who will. Silence roared in that room, a vacuum sucking the oxygen from my lungs. My pulse drummed in my molars, but somehow I managed not to flinch. Her words came out cold and measured, each syllable a calculated blow delivered in front of the entire staff. Her kingdom. Cold, public, humiliating. Karina's voice never wavered, never dipped into hesitation. She didn't need to. This was her power move, a demonstration of everything she'd built: respect, fear, authority. Yet they didn't know that I was her husband. Not officially. That fact was part of her design: control behind closed doors, invisibility in public. I'd watched her sculpt our shared world around my absence, turning me into a ghost at our own dinner table, and there she was, doing it again. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed, though beneath the surface I was raw with outrage. My mind raced through every memory: late nights drafting our first client proposal, the triumph when we closed that Series A round, the way we used to steal kisses in the stairwell before deadlines swallowed us whole. Back then, we were equals, partners. Now, here I stood as collateral, evidence of her ruthless ascent. When her gaze flicked to me, calm, imperious, I responded with a measured, "I'll need 24 hours to consider." My tone held just enough restraint to mask the tsunami inside. Every eye in the room bore into me, assessing, waiting for a sign of weakness. They didn't understand. None of them knew I'd once been her confidant, her co-conspirator in every late-night brainstorming session. They saw a colleague, maybe an underperforming executive whose time had passed. They didn't see the husband she dismantled piece by piece, the man who had supported her climb to the top while she sharpened her claws. But now, as I watched my words echo against the glass walls, I felt a quiet shift inside, the cracking of something I thought was unbreakable. Something in me broke in that moment, too. Karina's lips twitched, almost a smile. She stood, smoothing the lapels of her tailored blazer, and announced the meeting was adjourned. Around me, chairs scraped back, and a low murmur rippled through the room as colleagues gathered their briefcases and coffee cups. I didn't move. I watched them file past, their conversations hushed, as if they were afraid to disturb the moment's aftermath. Their shocked glances cut sharper than any blade. I allowed myself a slow breath before packing my laptop and notes, every motion deliberate, like a man who wants to show he still controls his own destiny, even if only in that small gesture. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, the corridor lights felt harsh and accusing. I closed my eyes for a split second and pictured Lucas, our 11-year-old, asleep in his room, blissfully unaware that his father was being publicly castrated in the name of corporate strategy. There was anger, yes, but beneath it was a deeper tremor of betrayal, an ache for the life we once shared, for the partnership I believed we had. Yet I knew that path had closed the moment she chose to humiliate me in front of people who would never care if I existed or not. I descended the elevator, pressing the lobby button with an almost violent snap, and as the doors opened, I realized I couldn't go home, not yet. I wasn't ready to face her tonight, to pretend everything was normal over dinner. I ducked into the stairwell instead, my footsteps echoing on concrete, and leaned against the cool wall. My fingers itched for my phone, but I resisted. Instead, I focused on steadying my breath, grounding myself in the moment. I replayed her words, the way she looked at me with that flicker of triumph in her eyes. I'll find someone who will. Someone who would take my place, who would be grateful for scraps. But that wasn't me anymore. The man who sat in that boardroom didn't tremble under her gaze. He didn't cower. He met her challenge with a request for time, a luxury she rarely afforded herself or anyone else. In that request, I felt the spark of something else, hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for escape and reinvention. I pressed my back to the wall, closed my eyes, and made a decision to answer her ultimatum not with defeat, but with defiance. I straightened up, squared my shoulders, and stepped out of the stairwell into the quiet hum of the parking garage. The cool air hit me like a shock, and I inhaled, tasting freedom for the first time in years. I would give her 24 hours. I would consider her cut, her terms, her power, but I would also consider my own options. And when I re-entered that glass fortress tomorrow, I wouldn't be the same man who walked out tonight. Something had shattered alongside my composure, but what emerged was stronger, a conviction that there was a life beyond her empire, and I intended to build it on my own terms. In that dark garage, with the echo of my footsteps fading, I touched my thumb to my teeth, feeling the rapid pulse beneath. Yes, I still felt my heartbeat there, but it no longer held fear. It held determination. I had 24 hours to choose. And I was going to choose me. We were just two names on a startup's payroll back then, Karina and me, young, hungry, and unaware of how ambition can rot the foundation it's built on. Silver Systems didn't have glossy logos or multi-million-dollar contracts at the time. Just a vision and a loft office above a bakery that made the whole place smell like sourdough and dreams. We were a ragtag bunch, chasing cloud infrastructure innovation like it was oxygen, and somehow in the middle of the chaos, we found each other. It started as late-night burrito runs, then turned into stolen kisses by the printer, and before I knew it, we were co-writing code, goals, and a life. Karina was fire, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. She saw ladders everywhere and climbed them 2 rungs at a time. I admired that at first. I encouraged it, supported her moves, took notes during pitch rehearsals, edited her presentations, even let her practice telling off underperforming engineers on me just so she'd sound fierce but fair. I wanted her to rise. I never realized she was training herself to rise alone. When she got promoted to VP of HR, I celebrated like it was my own win. She had presence in meetings, command over a room, and I found my niche in strategic partnerships. Quiet work, but critical. I built our client list from nothing: cold calls, trade shows, chasing leads that didn't want to be chased. I landed contracts that floated payroll during tight months, established relationships that the board would later call foundational to our scale. But I wasn't flashy about it. I wasn't on magazine panels or featured in Forbes' Next 100. I didn't need that. Karina did. She loved the spotlight, the applause, the LinkedIn reposts that called her visionary and disruptive. I was content with peace. She craved clout. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing us as partners and started seeing me as a prop, a placeholder, a man behind the curtain. We moved into a townhome in Rosegate once bonuses started to roll in. I remember the first night there, standing in the kitchen while Lucas napped upstairs, and she walked in wearing her silver-branded fleece, eyes sparkling from a company-wide presentation she'd just delivered. "We're building something huge," she whispered, arms wrapping around my waist. Together. I believed her. Foolishly. Because even then, the cracks had begun. She didn't ask how my meetings went anymore. She missed dinner twice a week for executive strategy calls and slowly replaced our shared calendar with her own. Our conversations drifted from personal to professional and then stopped altogether. At work, she stopped looking at me like I was her person. She looked at me like an asset, useful, but expendable. I should have spoken up. Should have pulled the ripcord when I started noticing the small humiliations, the time she corrected my report in front of the junior staff instead of waiting till we got home, or when she forgot to loop me in on a major contract negotiation even though the client had been mine. But I didn't. I told myself it was temporary, that the pressure would ease, that she'd remember we were on the same team. That boardroom meeting proved otherwise. After she slid that document across the table, with its ice-cold demand for a 60% pay cut and a threat of replacement, I replayed every compromise I'd ever made for her, every sacrifice that now sat neatly buried under her empire. This wasn't a moment of miscommunication. This was who she had become, and who she expected me to become: silent, compliant, replaceable. I drove home that day on autopilot, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the taste of humiliation still sour in my mouth. Our neighborhood looked too pristine, too polished for what I was feeling, like reality refused to match the storm inside me. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the soft glow of our living room lamp filter through the blinds. When I stepped inside, Lucas was on the floor building a Lego version of something that looked like Silver's office. He looked up and smiled. Mom said you were in a big meeting. He didn't know. He couldn't. And that innocence punched me harder than anything she'd said. Karina was in the kitchen, heating something in the microwave. She didn't turn around. Hey, she said, casual. Like she hadn't tried to publicly amputate my career just a few hours earlier. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation. But instead, I stared at her back, at the way she moved with such certainty, like her world was untouched by the damage she left in mine. You ambushed me today, I said finally. She paused. Barely. Then she turned, arms crossed. It wasn't personal. It was a strategic decision. You did it in front of them, I said, voice low. They're staff. Not family, she replied, coolly. They don't know we're married. They don't need to. I blinked. You think that makes it better? She shrugged. I made a call. It's not about you. And that's when I knew. It wasn't about me, not anymore. Not for a long time. I had been riding shotgun in a car she was driving straight off a cliff, and I'd been too loyal to jump out. I walked upstairs, past Lucas's drawings taped to the wall, past our wedding photo that still hung crooked on the hallway frame. I stood in our bedroom for a long time, looking at the life we built. The life she broke, one calculated decision at a time. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling shift from shadow to sunlight and felt the weight of something final settle into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. By morning, I wasn't the man who used to quietly protect her legacy. I was the man she underestimated. And I was done waiting for her to remember what we built. I was going to build something better. Without her. I couldn't stop replaying the scene. Karina's voice sharp, cold, like a blade across the back of my neck. The way the others looked at me as she did it, some with pity, some with silent relief that they weren't the target. The tap of her pen after the ultimatum. The stillness in the room as I said I needed 24 hours. And now, alone in my car, I sat parked outside our home with the engine off, fingers still gripping the wheel like I was waiting for something to crash. The house was dark except for the small porch light that flickered every few seconds, casting shadows across the front yard like ghosts pacing the grass. I didn't move. I stared at the windshield, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't know who I saw anymore. Husband, father, employee, target. And now, maybe something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in a long time, unshackled. Humiliation has a strange way of stripping things clean. You stop making excuses. You stop lying to yourself. You see things plain. Eventually, I stepped out and quietly made my way into the house. Lucas was asleep, his door cracked open just enough for the glow of his nightlight to seep through. I paused, peeking inside. He had fallen asleep with a drawing clutched in one hand, crayons scattered across his bed. I stepped in softly, eased the paper from his fingers. It was a family drawing, him in the center, Karina on the right, our dog that died 2 years ago on the left. Me? I wasn't there. Just a smudge where another figure might have gone, erased with a careless pink thumb. Maybe I'd missed too many breakfasts. Too many games. Maybe I'd made myself invisible. Or maybe I'd been made that way. I tucked the sheet on his nightstand and walked to my office downstairs. The walls were still lined with client folders, pitch decks, hand-drawn org charts from when Silver was nothing more than a desperate group of tech optimists trying to outthink Amazon. I'd built our strategic arm from scratch. Courted clients no one else could get close to. Held on to relationships like they were rope bridges. And now? A 60% pay cut for the man who brought in a third of the company's recurring revenue. Loyalty was a currency I spent far too generously. I opened my laptop. The company org chart still sat open in a pinned tab from earlier that afternoon. My name, now attached to a strange new title, Special Consultant. It felt like a severance in disguise. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the tab. Then I opened a new one and typed 4 words, Kortnick's Systems career page. Kortnick's. The name had always lingered like a whisper in Silver's corridors. Our top competitor. Sleeker, louder, better funded. They tried poaching me 3 times before, always dangling better pay, better titles, faster tracks. And I turned them down each time for loyalty, for principle, for Karina. Never again. I bypassed their careers page and pulled up my contacts instead. Jared Ortega. The name brought back a flood of memories. He'd been an intern on my team a decade ago, fresh out of grad school with more ideas than tact. I mentored him, taught him how to pitch without sounding like he was begging, showed him how to read a room. We'd lost touch when he left for Cortnix 5 years back. Now he was VP of Strategic Growth. I stared at his name for a beat longer. My mouse hovered over a message. I clicked. Jared. Long time. Hope you're well. I'd like to discuss something important. Are you available this week for a quick conversation? I hit send, closed the tab, and stared into the quiet darkness. For minutes later, I heard the ping. I leaned forward and opened it. Marcus. Damn, I hoped this day would come. You free tomorrow morning? Early. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Something real, not rehearsed or diplomatic. Name the place, I replied. We settled on Rosegate Diner. 6:30 a.m. That was Jared. Early, eager, efficient. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, my fingers tingling with a sensation I hadn't felt in over a year. Possibility. Not in a vague, someday kind of way. But right now, like someone had just cracked open the window in a room where I'd been suffocating. Down the hall, I heard the muffled clatter of Karina moving in the kitchen, probably preparing her overnight oats or one of her nutrient smoothies with all the silent confidence of someone who had never been challenged. I didn't go to her. I didn't say a word. I powered down my laptop and went upstairs, stepping past the photos on the wall, vacations, awards dinners, Lucas's first birthday party. All curated moments. All frozen in time. In our bedroom, Karina was already in bed, a book on her lap. She looked up but said nothing. Just returned to her reading like I was a coat on a rack, something she kept around but no longer noticed. I changed in silence. Slid into bed without brushing against her. Stared at the ceiling, heart still echoing against my ribs. She didn't ask about the meeting. She didn't ask how I felt. She never did. And tomorrow, I would meet with the man she once laughed off as junior talent. I would sit across from someone who remembered what I taught him, not just about business, but about loyalty and grit. And I would listen to what he had to offer, not out of desperation, but with intent. I'd given Silvra everything. I gave her everything. Now, it was time to give something back to myself. Across the bridge, a new chapter was waiting. And this time, I would walk in with both eyes open. The Rosegate Diner hadn't changed since I'd last been there 5 years ago. Same cracked leather booths, same flickering neon sign above the counter, and the same waitress, Gloria, who moved like she had owned the place long before the actual owner ever signed a lease. It was the kind of place people came to disappear into routine. But that morning, before the sun even touched the rooftops, I wasn't here for routine. I was here to end one chapter and begin another. Jared was already seated when I walked in, grinning like a man who'd just found a winning lottery ticket. He stood up to hug me. Marcus, he said, slapping me on the back. I swear, I've pictured this moment more times than I'd admit to HR. I chuckled, easing into the seat across from him. I see Cortnix hasn't taken the charm out of you. Just polished it, he said, then signaled to Gloria without even glancing at the menu. Coffee for both. Black, right? Some things never changed. I leaned back, studied him a little. He'd filled out, his jaw sharper, his suit better tailored, his voice steadier. He looked like a man who finally owned the rooms he used to sneak into. And yet there was still that hint of awe in his eyes when he spoke to me, like I was the guy who pulled him out of his own shadow. Maybe I had. But today, I wasn't his mentor. Today, we were equals. So, I said, folding my hands. Let's talk. Jared didn't waste time. He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days ago, my wife had done the same thing, with threats tucked behind every sentence. But this folder? It hummed with opportunity. Senior Director of Strategic Growth, he said. 180 base. 30% bonus potential. Full benefits. Signing bonus that'll make you forget you ever got downgraded to consultant. And more importantly, he leaned in, lowering his voice. We'll fast-track you to VP in 6 months, maybe less, if even half your former clients follow you. I blinked. That's generous. No, he replied. That's overdue. I opened the folder. Neatly printed offer letter, compensation package, NDAs, standard onboarding forms. But what caught my eye wasn't what was in the folder, it was what wasn't. No non-compete clause, I said aloud. Jared nodded. We don't need it. You're not just a name on a resume. You're the reason deals close. People trust you. And trust doesn't come with an expiration date. I sipped my coffee, letting the words settle. I meant in my current contract, I clarified. Silvra. Karina had it removed last year. Said it would give me more flexible. He raised an eyebrow. You serious? I pulled out my phone, tapped through a few PDFs, and turned it toward him. Page 11. No non-compete. No client solicitation clause. No IP restrictions. Jared whistled low. She thought you'd never leave. She was wrong. He tapped the table, smirking. You know they'll try to drag you through the mud anyway. I nodded. Let them. I've bled for that company. The files I built, the trust one earned, the clients I signed, they weren't handed to me. They weren't gifted because I married into power. I earned them. And I won't lift a finger to steal a single one. You won't need to, he said. They'll call you. They'll ask where you are. They'll follow because they want to, not because you ask. The waitress brought our food. I hadn't even realized I was hungry until the smell of eggs and toast hit me. Jared took a bite, then pointed at the folder. So? You in? I didn't answer right away. I picked up the pin he'd placed neatly beside the packet. It felt heavy in my hand, not just from the metal, but from what it symbolized. Not revenge, not ego, but self-respect. After being buried in Karina's shadow, after being turned into a convenient pawn in her strategic ambitions, here was a chance to step back into the light. I signed. Jared raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. To freedom, I said. We ate in silence after that, the kind that only exists between people who understand the gravity of a moment. As we left the diner, the sky had begun to brighten, soft streaks of orange cutting through the dawn. I climbed into my car, folder in hand, and sat there for a long moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I felt weightless. Like the tension I'd been carrying in my chest for the past 2 years had finally lifted. When I got home, the house was quiet. Karina's car was gone, early meeting, no doubt. She didn't ask where I'd gone, didn't check to see if I came home last night, didn't seem to care that we hadn't spoken since the HR ambush. I went to my office, closed the door, and pulled up the Silvra employee handbook, the one I'd helped write. It was all still there, pages of policies, clauses, protocols. But none of it applied to me anymore. I was untethered. Still, I scanned through my own employment agreement again, just to be sure. No non-compete. No restrictions on where I worked next. Karina had assumed I'd be loyal until the end. She'd never imagined I'd have the spine to walk away, much less the leverage to land somewhere stronger. She'd unhooked my leash thinking I wouldn't move without her. Her mistake. I printed my resignation letter that night. Straightforward. Professional. No bitterness on the page, but every sentence dripped with clarity. Tomorrow, I would walk into her glass-walled office wearing the same suit I wore when we pitched Silvra to its first investor. Black. Crisp. Poised. And this time, I wouldn't be the one begging for her approval. I'd be the one holding the final word. I wore the suit with intention. Blackwell. Tailored. The one I hadn't touched in years but never had the heart to get rid of. The one I wore when Karina and I pitched Silvra to the angel investors who first gave us a shot. Back then, she had held my hand under the conference table, squeezing twice every time she got nervous. Now, she wouldn't even meet my eyes across the dinner table. The irony was rich. I adjusted my cufflinks in the mirror, took a long breath, and walked out the door. The drive to Silvra was quiet. Not a single song felt right, so I let the silence ride with me. I passed the same coffee shop where Karina and I used to split a bagel on early mornings. She always took the top half with the extra sesame seeds. These days, she barely spoke before leaving for the gym or another strategy call. Somewhere between ambition and titles, we stopped being a team. When I stepped into the building, I nodded at reception, then rode the elevator to the executive floor. My heart didn't race. No tremble in my hands. Just a strange calm, like I was walking into a funeral I'd already grieved. The doors opened and there she was, behind the glass wall of her office, back straight, pen in hand, dissecting some document like it owed her an apology. I knocked once. She looked up, surprised to see me. Marcus, she said flatly. I thought you were taking the day. I'm here to make a decision, I replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. She gestured without standing. Go ahead. I placed the resignation letter on her desk. No preamble, no apology, just the truth in 12-point calibri. She didn't reach for it, just stared at it like it might explode. Then she leaned back in her chair, arms crossing slowly. You're making a mistake, she said. No, I replied. I'm making a choice. There was a flicker behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. You're walking away from 14 years, she said. I nodded. 14 years where I made this company millions. 14 years where I stayed loyal even when it cost me time with my son, cost me my peace. Her tone hardened. You're not going to find another role in this market at your level. Not with your compensation expectations. Not with this economy. I smiled then. Just a little. Actually, I already have. That made her blink. Just for a second. The mask cracked. Where? Kortenix, I said. Calm. Direct. And there it was, the moment she lost control. Her body went rigid. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk like she was holding onto the ground beneath her. Kortenix, she repeated, as if the name itself was a betrayal. They offered what I'm worth. What I should have been worth here. Her voice dropped. You do realize we'll sue. I reached into my leather folder and dropped the Kortenix offer letter beside my resignation. No non-compete. No IP conflicts. No client solicitation. You forgot to protect the one person you thought would never leave. The silence was heavy. She flipped through the Kortenix contract, her eyes scanning the terms. I watched her lips press into a thin line. The woman who once used to say, we make a great team, now calculating exactly how she lost a partner, personally and professionally. I removed the non-compete to give you room to grow, she said tightly. No, I replied. You removed it because you thought I'd never use it. Her jaw clenched. I was loyal to a fault, I continued. I passed on offers. Sat through your meetings where I was invisible. Took the back seat so you could shine. I never wanted to be the face. But when you humiliated me in front of your team, our team, you made something very clear. I don't belong here anymore. And I'm done pretending I do. She stood, finally, as if height would help her reclaim authority. This will damage our reputation. No, I said. It will damage yours. For a beat, we stood there in silence. Two people who once built something side by side. Now on opposite sides of a war neither of us declared out loud. The room felt colder than I remembered. More clinical. Less ours. I built this company, she said quietly. So did I replied. And now I'm building something else. There was a finality in the way I said it. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I could tell she wanted to say more, but there was nothing left that could undo what had already been broken. I turned to leave. Marcus, she called just as I reached the door. I paused, hand on the knob. Why now, she asked. Her voice wasn't demanding anymore. It was something closer to human. I looked back at her. The woman who used to dance barefoot in our living room, who once whispered her dreams against my collarbone, who used to believe in us. Because yesterday, I said, I realized I've spent too long being loyal to someone who stopped being loyal to me. Then I opened the door and stepped out. By the time I reached my office, news had already started to ripple through the floor. Devin from legal gave me a long, unreadable look. Maria from finance stood near the coffee machine, eyes glassy. I gave her a nod. She smiled weakly and mouthed, thank you. I packed my things in silence. A few folders. My son's crayon drawing of a rocket ship. A coffee mug that said do the work. I left the framed picture of Karina and me at last year's gala in the drawer. That wasn't a memory I needed anymore. HR pinged me before I could head out. We'll coordinate your exit documents, the email said. Please wait for security to escort you per protocol. Security. After all I'd done, after all I gave. This was how it ended. Like a threat. Like a liability. I waited. Calm. Unbothered. I didn't want a scene. I didn't need one. The security guard was polite, almost apologetic. Just protocol, Mr. Ellison, he muttered. I nodded. Of course. As we walked through the corridor, I could feel eyes on me. Colleagues trying to look busy. Screens flickering with pretend work. No one spoke, but everyone watched. And then I stepped through the glass doors of silver one final time. No announcement. No applause. Just quiet shoes on tile and a gust of wind as the doors shut behind me. But I didn't look back. Not once. The air outside Silver's building was different. Not just cooler, but freer, like the kind of breeze that lets you know you've just walked away from a fire and survived. I stood on the steps for a few seconds longer than I needed to, holding the box of my things in one arm, my resignation confirmation envelope in the other. It was strange how light it all felt. After 14 years of loyalty, I expected the weight of regret, the tug of nostalgia. Instead, I felt nothing but clarity. Devin from Legal had sent me a one-line Slack message an hour before. Do you want a quiet exit strategy? I declined without hesitation. I didn't need fanfare, but I wasn't going to slink out the back door like I'd been caught stealing office supplies. I wanted them to see me leave, to feel the ripple of it. Maria from finance had been crying. She didn't say much, just hugged me fiercely and whispered. She didn't have to do it like that. She meant Karina. Everyone did. They'd seen her play her hand, wield her power in that conference room not like a leader, but like a tyrant marking her territory. And now that I was gone, they'd be watching her even more closely, waiting to see who'd be next. The security escort wasn't even necessary, but protocol demanded it. For senior staff, they claimed. What they meant was, for those whose exits hurt the bottom line. The guard walked quietly beside me, eyes fixed ahead. When we reached the elevator, he pressed the button, stepped back. I glanced at him. You draw the short straw? I asked. He gave a half smile. You're not the first executive I've walked out, Mr. Ellison, but you're the first one who left with his head held high. I appreciated that more than I thought I would. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out to a hushed room. Receptionists paused mid-call. Interns pretended to scroll through emails they weren't reading. I walked across the marble floors I used to help mop in the early days when we couldn't afford cleaning staff, back when Karina and I shared a desk and a single dream. Now she had an entire corner office, and I had the one thing she couldn't reclaim, my name, my value, and the trust of every client I'd ever worked with. I exited the building into the afternoon sun, slid the box onto the passenger seat of my car, and sat for a long while with the engine off. No calls, no emails, just stillness. Then, almost like clockwork, my phone lit up. First was Sonia Adair from Teltrix Solutions. Hey Marcus, just heard. Where are you headed? Then Marcus Doyle from Graywell International. Tell me you're staying in the industry. We want to talk. A few minutes later, Elaine Winters. The same client who once said she'd never work with anyone but Silvera. If you're leaving, I'm reconsidering our position. Let's connect soon. I hadn't pitched, hadn't even hinted. And yet here they were calling, texting, asking where I went. Because it wasn't about the company. It never had been. They were buying me. My judgment. My relationship. The years I spent learning their business inside and out. Karina never understood that. She thought people could be managed like numbers. That loyalty could be drafted into contracts. But real loyalty isn't written down. It's earned. I replied to each one with a simple message. We'll talk Monday. I'll have something to share. Then I opened a fresh notebook. Wrote 3 words at the top of the page. Courtnix. Day 1. That night, I got home before Lucas did. He had soccer practice, and Karina had volunteered to do the pickup, probably to soften the optics, to paint a picture of domestic unity that hadn't existed in months. I sat at the kitchen table, box beside me, and took out a photo from the top. Me and Lucas at a park 2 years ago. He was holding a popsicle, his mouth stained blue, his hand in mine. I'd forgotten about this one. Karina had taken it. I remembered how she smiled at us then, genuinely. I wondered where that woman had gone. The garage door opened. I heard the car pull in, the telltale sound of Lucas kicking off his cleats before he even got to the door. He burst in a moment later, breathless. Dad, did you see my goal? Not yet, I said, standing up. But you can show me. I'm home early. His eyes lit up. You're never home this early. I will be now. He ran off to get his ball, and I turned just as Karina walked in. She looked tired. Not exhausted, just drained in that permanent way success can sometimes carve into a person. Her eyes flicked to the box on the table. So it's done, she said. It is. She nodded. They'll come after you. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. No clients solicited. No documents. You built your company on rules. I followed everyone. She sighed and leaned against the kitchen counter. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I know. There was a long silence between us, filled only by the sound of Lucas kicking the ball against the living room wall and laughing at the rebound. I never meant to hurt you, she said at last. I met her eyes. You didn't need to mean it. You just needed to stop seeing me. That was the moment it landed for both of us, that the damage wasn't in one public insult or one pay cut. It had started long ago in all the quiet choices, the diminishing, the dismissals, the absence of kindness when power arrived. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, voice even. She nodded once and stepped past me into the living room. I didn't follow. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, I emailed Jared. All 4 clients reached out. Not because I asked. Because they saw what you saw. He replied 5 minutes later. Then we begin. And we did. Monday morning hit like a starting pistol. No time for nerves, no time for nostalgia. I sat at my new desk, sleek, minimalist, modern, with a fresh notepad, a full mug of black coffee, and a locked-in determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't easing into Courtnix. I was leading. Jared had made it clear the minute I signed. We're not hiring you to blend in. We're building a new lane for you. That lane began now. At 8:03 a.m., my inbox chimed. Subject, checking in. Marcus, just heard the news. If you're open to a conversation, I'd love to catch up. We've got some flexibility coming up in Q3, and I've always valued your insight. Sonia Dare, Teltrix Solutions. Sonia was old school, sharp as a blade, and twice as unforgiving if you crossed her. She never moved lightly. The fact that she was the first to reach out wasn't an accident. It was a signal. By 8:17 a.m., I had 2 more emails waiting, Marcus Doyle from Graywell and Fiona Lacey from Enduratech. None of them asked directly if I'd poached them. They were too savvy for that. Instead, the messages read like invitations. Where are you landing? We may need a new approach. Let me know where you are. Every word coded in plausible deniability, every sentence humming with interest. And I hadn't made a single call. That was the thing Karina never understood. Business relationships aren't built on discounts or gimmicks. They're built on trust. Trust that's earned in quiet ways. Meeting deadlines without being asked, staying late to walk a client through integration issues, remembering the name of a client's daughter when no one else did. Trust lives in the small details. And now, as the news of my departure rippled through the industry, trust was doing the work for me. I didn't rush to reply. I spent the morning reviewing Courtnix's client portfolios, looking for gaps, missed opportunities, areas where we could outperform Silvra. It wasn't hard to find them. Silvra had become bloated, too many middle managers, too many processes that smothered momentum. I knew because I helped build them. But Courtnix was lean, fast, and ready to move. At 11:20 a.m., Jared stepped into my office, a grin already spreading across his face. Let me guess, he said. They're calling. They're circling, I corrected, tapping my inbox. They'll call by Friday. They'll call today, he said, pulling up a chair. Sonia's on a panel with me next week. She asked if we could grab coffee in advance. I've known her for 8 years. She's not a coffee kind of woman. I nodded, but I wasn't surprised. This wasn't arrogance. It was the slow unfolding of inevitable consequences. Silver thought they owned those accounts. What they owned was access. What I had was loyalty. And that couldn't be bought back. Jared slid a paper onto my desk. List of key accounts we want to target. Most of them are clients you touched at some point, even if indirectly. Take a look. You know them better than we do. I scanned the list. Teltrix, Graywell, Norkin, Xylene, and 3 others I'd helped onboard back in the lean days when Silvra still hosted brainstorming sessions on folding tables. I recognized the names. I remembered the wins. And I remembered how I was never the one invited to the podium when the deals closed. How aggressive are we being? I asked. You tell me, Jared said. We're not stealing. We're simply being open. If they come, we catch. No emails. No pitches. No contact first. Just let the magnet work. And it was already working. At 12:03 p.m., the first call came. My phone buzzed. Elaine Winters. The same Elaine who once told me, to my face, I don't switch vendors. I don't do drama. The woman who once asked Karina to remove me from a Zoom call because she thought executives should know when to exit quietly. I picked up. Elaine, I said. Marcus, she replied, her tone cool but curious. You landed somewhere yet? I have. Courtnix. Yes. There was a pause. Good. I've been waiting for a reason. A reason. That's what I had become, a reason to reevaluate, to reconsider, to realign. We talked for 6 minutes. She asked questions about Courtnix's roadmap, stability, ethics. I answered clearly, honestly, with no attempts to sell her. When we hung up, I didn't press. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. At 2:12 p.m., Marcus Doyle followed. By 4:47 p.m., I had 6 meetings on the calendar. All requested. None initiated by me. I leaned back in my chair, watching the soft glow of sunset stretch across the Courtnix skyline view, an office without tension, without judgment, without silent warfare tea. When Karina came to pick him up, she paused in the doorway. You're home early, she said. I work somewhere that values balance, I said, not looking up from the drawing Lucas had taped to the fridge. She didn't respond. As they left, Lucas turned back and whispered, "Can we hang out again Wednesday?" "Count on it," I said. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, the house quiet, the evening light soft and forgiving. I'd spent years thinking that victory was about holding the high ground, staying loyal, waiting to be recognized. But real victory? It was having people remember who you were when you're no longer in the room. And they were remembering now. It was a Thursday night. Late. Lucas had just gone to bed, and I'd finished replying to a last batch of emails, quiet ripples from the growing wave of client shifts. The numbers were speaking for themselves. Courtnix's weekly growth metrics were starting to mirror Silver's losses. Even Jared, usually calm and smooth, was starting to wear a look I hadn't seen before. Hunger. The kind of hunger that came from watching years of waiting finally start to bear fruit. I just set my phone down when it rang, an unknown number, local area code. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Marcus Ellison," I said. There was a pause. Then, "Marcus. It's Harlan Royce, the CEO of Silver Systems." I stood without realizing it, one hand bracing the edge of the kitchen island. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Even when I was still with the company, Harlan was one of those appear once a quarter leaders, only visible when there were cameras or crises. Apparently, this was both. "Evening, Harlan," I said evenly. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "I'd like to speak man-to-man," he began, his tone diplomatic, controlled. I could practically hear the legal department sitting behind him, nodding silently. "All right," I replied, walking to the living room window. "I'm listening. This situation with your departure, it's escalating more than we anticipated." "I didn't escalate anything. That's not what I meant." He cleared his throat. "You've built strong relationships over the years, and we recognize that. But the client shifts we've seen recently are the result of trust," I cut in. "Trust you let your head of people publicly destroy." He was quiet for a beat. Then he continued, measured. "We'd like to offer you a revised package. New title, senior partner, equity, full reinstatement. We can undo what was done." I almost laughed. Not out of disrespect, but disbelief. The man who once told a boardroom that I was foundational, but not irreplaceable, now wanted to reverse course because he finally understood that foundation didn't mean invisible. It meant essential. "You're too late," I said. "Think about your family," he said softly. I looked down the hallway, where Lucas's nightlight glowed under the doorframe. "I have," I replied. I thought about my son asking why his mother yelled at me in front of the entire staff. I thought about the mornings he saw me leave before sunrise and come back after dark. I thought about the way he stopped drawing me in family portraits because I was always at work. "Marcus, I gave everything to Silvera," I continued. "I built departments from scratch, held clients when your systems were failing, brought in the kinds of contracts that paid for Karina's entire HR restructuring. And when I needed dignity, just dignity, you gave me silence. Until the numbers dropped. We didn't realize. You didn't care," I said, sharper now. "And now that the market's reacting, I'm suddenly valuable again? That's not how it works." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, finally, "Is there anything we can say to make this right?" I looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the pavement. I thought about the peace I'd felt walking into Courtnix each day. The respect in Jared's voice when he asked for my opinion. The way my calendar finally had room for my son. I thought about the meetings I'd had that week alone, 7 clients already transitioning. For more reviewing proposals. The new team I was mentoring, people who looked at me not as a relic, but as a leader. And I thought about Karina, who hadn't reached out once. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to argue. "You can't make it right," I said. "Because you let it go too far. And the worst part is, you probably still don't understand what you let her do to me. You didn't lose a name. You lost the one person who never asked for the spotlight, but held your brand together when everything else cracked." Another pause. But this one had weight. "I see," he finally said. "No, Harlan. That's the problem. You never did." I ended the call. I stood there in the quiet, the silence thick around me, the finality of that conversation ringing louder than anything he'd said. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That part had burned away weeks ago. What I felt now was something cleaner. Stronger. Closure. That night, I walked into Lucas's room. He was half awake, curled in a messy tangle of sheets, his mouth slightly open. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a hand through his hair. "You won't have to ask me to be home anymore," I whispered. "I'm already here." The next morning, I opened my email and typed one final message to Jared. Subject: full commitment. Harlan called. He offered everything. I turned it down. Let's move forward. Jared replied 2 minutes later. Then it's time to grow this thing. Full speed. And we did. 2 months had passed. The skyline outside my Kortenix office shimmered with late morning sun, the glass panels of neighboring towers casting reflections across my desk. I just wrapped up a call with Graywell International, our third successful transition in 6 weeks, when my assistant knocked gently on the glass. Marcus, there's a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd want to see her. I didn't need to ask who. I stood, adjusted the cuff of my shirt, and walked out to the reception area. And there she was, Karina. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The steel-hard edges she once wore like armor were duller, and the confident tilt of her chin was now tinged with restraint. Her blazer was crisp, her heels sharp as ever, but there was a quiet unease in the way she held her purse close to her body, like it could shield her from what she'd come to face. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Marcus, she said, her voice measured. Karina, I was hoping we could talk. Privately. I nodded once, turned, and led her to my office. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing in a silence thick with everything we hadn't said in months. She glanced around the space, sleek, warm-toned, tastefully modern. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in natural light, and behind my desk, the Kortenix logo gleamed against matte black. This is nice, she said, forcing something close to polite. Very you. I sat behind my desk and motioned for her to take the seat across from me. She did, folding her hands over her knee. Her eyes darted to the nameplate on my desk. Marcus Ellison, Vice President, Global Client Partnerships. Her jaw tightened. You've turned half the market against me, she said, skipping the preamble. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself when you made a spectacle out of your husband in front of junior staff. I just left. I was doing my job. You were executing a performance, I said. You didn't just cut my salary. You tried to humiliate me. And you made sure they all saw it. She shifted in her chair. I didn't think it would unravel this way. That's the thing, Karina. You didn't think at all. You thought I'd take it like I always did. Quietly. With grace. You forgot I built Silver's backbone while you chased visibility. I never took credit for your work. No, but you never shared it either. She looked down at her hands for a moment, gathering herself. You were always consistent. Predictable. And you needed that. Until you didn't. Silence again. She looked up at me, the edge in her expression softening just slightly. I came because I wanted to understand, she said. Why you let it all go. Us. The company. Everything. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk. I didn't let anything go, Karina. I just stopped holding things that were already breaking me. She blinked. I fought for us, I continued. For the company. For every meeting, every deal, every late night that I covered while you climbed. And you, somewhere along the way, stopped seeing me as a partner. I became convenient. Background. Replaceable. I was under pressure, she said quietly. We all were. But pressure reveals character. And yours came out cold. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Do you love what you're doing now? I didn't hesitate. I do. She nodded once, like she already knew the answer. And Lucas? She asked. He sees me now, I said. I'm home. I coach his team. He puts me in his drawings again. That hit her harder than anything else I'd said. You know what he asked me last week? I added. Why didn't Mom ever clap when you came on stage at Career Day? I didn't even know he noticed. But he did. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No defense. No explanation. You're right, she said finally. I stopped seeing you. Somewhere between my ambition and my control, I just assumed you'd never leave. And I told myself that made me strong. It made you blind. She nodded. Slowly. Then stood. Well, you've made your point. I stood too. I didn't ask you here. I know, she said. But I had to see it for myself. What you became when you stopped standing in my shadow. We locked eyes for a long moment. There was no hatred there. No venom. Just a mutual understanding that something had ended, and it wasn't temporary. You were always meant for more, she whispered. I stepped back. You just didn't want me to have it. She took a shaky breath and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, she turned once more. Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Karina. She left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat back down, the quiet settling around me. But this silence didn't ache. It didn't feel like a void. It felt earned. Peaceful. Right. And outside, the city continued to move, deals waiting, clients calling, my future wide open. She had walked into my office thinking I might look back. But I was already facing forward. A full year had passed. 12 months since I walked out of Silver Systems with a box in my hands and my reputation intact. 12 months since Karina's voice echoed through that glass-walled room, delivering a threat wrapped in corporate language. And now, sitting at the head of a wide walnut conference table in Kortnick's downtown headquarters, I realized something. I hadn't once looked back. Not out of stubbornness. Out of peace. Final numbers from Q2, Jared said, sliding a folder across to me. We're up 27% over last year. That includes the Teltrix account, Graywell, Xylene, and now Enduratech. I opened the folder and let the numbers speak for themselves. Every name in that report had once been a Silver client. Every deal was one I had either originated, nurtured, or saved when others had fumbled it. But I hadn't poached a single one. I hadn't needed to. Trust is gravity. It pulls the right people toward you once the mask slips from those they thought they could rely on. Maria now ran our partner analytics division. Devin led our compliance team. Both had followed me from Silvera. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. They saw what I had endured. They saw what Karina did. And when the opportunity came to build something different, something ethical and quietly powerful, they didn't hesitate. Kortnick's hadn't just gained clients. It had gained culture. I closed the folder. Let's keep going. No press. No victory laps. Just results. Jared grinned. You ever gonna let yourself enjoy this? I'm enjoying it, I said. I just don't need to scream about it. Later that evening, I left the office while the sun still hung low over the skyline. My car was already idling in the underground lot, another silent courtesy from the assistant I once doubted I needed. I'd learned something in the last year. Freedom doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes, it comes from routine. From walking into a place every day where you're respected, not questioned. From leaving early enough to make it home in time for dinner. Lucas was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in. Soccer cleats on the table, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand, and a grin smeared with peanut butter. Coach Ellison, he declared, we've got practice tomorrow. Wouldn't miss it, I said, ruffling his hair. He was taller now, more confident. And for the first time since the divorce papers had been quietly filed and finalized 6 months ago, I saw how much calmer he was. Less anxious. Less confused. The absence of tension in the house had made room for growth, and both of us. He ran off to get his ball from the yard, and I stepped out to the porch, phone in hand. An alert popped up on my screen. Silver stock down 17% following quarterly loss. HR department undergoing restructuring. There was a picture embedded in the article, Harlan looking stiff behind a podium, his tie slightly crooked, and beside him, an empty chair. Karina had stepped down a few months earlier, citing personal growth goals. Translation: she'd been pushed. The industry wasn't stupid. When 4 major clients walked within 90 days of my resignation, it raised eyebrows. When 2 of her own staff followed me to Kortnick's, it raised questions. When the media caught wind of her HR decisions and the mysterious reclassification of her own husband, it became a liability. And me? I didn't comment. I didn't retaliate. I didn't even post a cryptic LinkedIn update. I just kept building. Because real payback isn't noisy. It's dignified. It's being so focused on what you're creating that you don't have time to burn down what you left behind. Dinner that night was simple: grilled chicken, roasted carrots, and a salad Lucas mostly picked around. We laughed about a joke his coach told, and when he went to bed, I sat by the window with a glass of wine and the soft buzz of contentment settling around me. I thought about everything Karina had once meant to me, everything we tried to build together, and how she had weaponized the very thing we created. But I also thought about what came after. The morning sun through Kortnick's floor-to-ceiling windows. The way Maria teared up during our team retreat when she said, "It's nice to work somewhere that feels human again." The late-night pitch meetings with Jared where we built strategies off instinct, not ego. The emails from clients who said, "We trust you to lead this." Karina's voice was gone from my life now. Her silence was louder than any apology would have been. But her absence didn't sting. It was a gift. Because the truth is, I didn't need her to fall for me to rise. I didn't need Silver to burn to prove I'd been fire all along. I just needed to walk away and remember who I was before I started shrinking to fit her spotlight. I took a final sip of wine and looked out at the stars peeking through the dark. Then I picked up my phone and opened a blank note. Reminder to self. Leadership isn't loud. Dignity doesn't beg. Loyalty, when abused, becomes clarity. Trust will follow the person, not the brand. The best payback is peace. I closed the phone, set it on the table, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would come, and I was ready.